Pi Sigma Epsilon is proud to present tonight the most effective sales brain, the most inspiring sales personality in the United States. J. Douglas Edwards is known and respected across this continent. He is one of the leading independent sales consultants. He's been retained to solve the marketing and sales problems of a multitude of industries. Doug has represented every firm from real estate to insurance, from executive aircraft to industrial valves, from electronic brains to new homes. His successes have been overwhelming everywhere. As a speaker, he's eagerly sought after by sales executive clubs, by service clubs of all types, by real estate boards, by trade associations, you name it. He's most important, however, as a man whose methods make sense, good common sense. May I present now to you the man whose life is dedicated to seeing that you, as salesmen, make more money than you have ever made before. Doug Edwards.
There is no subject on this earth that I am as happy to talk about as this subject called closing. These closes are going to require that you actually go through the hard-headed process of learning them. Now, I'm not kidding. You've got to learn them. As you will see when we get into some of these advanced closes, the words themselves are very critical. But let's start now talking about the basic close. This is the most fundamental of all closing devices. First of all, how many times do you take no for an answer before you believe it? Let's be honest. Once? Or do you usually hang on twice? Now here's an interesting truth. We measured not too long ago 100 salesmen who earn $100,000 a year or more in selling. These are great, big-time pros. And we found that these greatest of closers averaged their close on their 5th closing attempt. And when we find that the average salesman knows 2 closes and uses 1, is there any question why we have so many peons in this business? When do you start closing? This is very simple. The minute you open your mouth. Because the whole sales process is nothing but one big close. I think of all the questions I'm asked by salesmen, and believe me, I've asked all kinds of questions. The one that is most commonly asked is this next one. Doug, when do you close? I am a professional trainer. I have trained tens of thousands of salesmen across this country and through Canada. And I must, in complete honesty, tell you that I cannot tell you when to close. Every salesman who is a great salesman has something we call a closing instinct. You don't have to point out when. He knows when. Now, I can't tell you when, but I can tell you how to learn when. There's only one way in this world you'll ever learn when to close, and that's by closing too soon and too often. That's right. If you keep on doing what you've been doing, closing too late and too seldom, you'll never learn to close. You learn to close by closing too soon and too often, and this way you develop a closing instinct. Now let's talk about the basic close. This is the most fundamental of all closing devices. This is number one close always, by every professional salesman that I have ever known. It's called the order blank close. And I am sure that any man in this room or woman who is successfully selling is using it. because you can't succeed without it. In order to use the order blank closed, it's a very simple process. You ask a man a question, the answer to which you fill out on your order blank, contract, agreement, whatever your closing form is. You don't say, well, shall we go ahead? You simply ask him a question and fill out the answer on your order blank. Now, what kind of questions do you ask? Obviously, first of all, what is your correct full name, sir? And you fill it out. Your correct mailing address or shipping address or delivery address or whatever. Now, do you realize that as long as he doesn't stop you, he's bought? Is that right? You assume that he's bought. All you do is to fill out the form. What do you do when you get to the bottom of this thing? You've got the whole thing now filled out. You just ask him one question after another until you've filled out the whole order form. What do you do when you get to the bottom? Not sign it. What's wrong with this word sign? What have you been told about signing things? You've been told, read it, be careful, beware, haven't you? All your lives you've heard people say, don't sign anything. Now, the great salesmen today do it very simply. They just swing it around, hand the pen to the man and say, would you okay this for me, please? This is strange. They won't sign it, but they'll okay it. Now, in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you the most critically important instruction I will ever give you in the field of closing. If you ever want to be a closer, these are the things you must remember because they are completely fundamental. First of all, do you understand what a closing question is? Let me define it. A closing question is any question you ask, the answer to which confirms the fact that he's bought. What is your complete name, sir? What is your mailing address? What was the shipment date? Any of these things. These are closing questions, aren't they? Now, here is the critical instruction. Whenever you ask a closing question, whenever you ask a closing question, shut up! Shut up! Remember this always, the first man that talks loses. And this is true. When you ask that closing question, you shut up. I remember years ago I was training for a major corporation. I was running a training class in New York City. Whole series of them. And I got to this point in the training, and for some reason, I never did quite know why, just before I got to this point, the president of the corporation came walking into the back of the room. And I let go the way I usually let go, and Prez went about 3 feet in the air. He lit on both feet, turned around, walked right out of the room. Well, for the entire balance of that week, whenever my phone rang, I jumped. But nothing happened. Next week, I was running another session, and he must have gotten hold of the schedule, because just about the same time, he comes walking back into the room. And so I let go again. This time he was anchored. He didn't even budge. And when the class had settled down, why, he said, Douglas, do you mind if I say something? Who was I to say no? I said, well, of course not. Come on up. So he came up. And he said, you know, when I was in this classroom last week, I heard that for the first time. And it amused me. I decided to try it. Within the past few days, one of the top organizations in America has been in here trying to lease us a product that will cost us $1 million a year. And he said, you know, those must be real good salesmen, because he asked the closing question. And he shut up. And Douglas, so did I. He said, by my watch, there wasn't a sound in that room for 20 minutes. He said, do you know what happened? I laughed. Do you know what happened? I bought. Now this is critical. You see, if you shut up, only one of two things can happen. Number one, he goes along with you. Or number two, he gives you a reason for not going along. As a salesman, you can cash either one, can't you? But what happens to you? There's 3 ticked seconds of silence and you get jittery. Now you've got to add something. And now you open your big fat mouth and he's off the hook. You talk about pressure. There is no pressure you will ever exert that will remotely approach the pressure of silence. And I don't care how long you sit there. This one boy got $1 million a year order for sitting there for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Boy, that must have been an age. But I submit these 2 words, shut up, are the most important words you will ever learn as closers. Now, there are all kinds of alternates of choice. You always give him a choice between buying this, buying that, buying this way, or buying that way. Now, why don't you give me some alternates of choice that you can or do use in whatever product you're selling? Come on, let me hear from you. Do you want your premiums monthly or annually? The only word I object to is pay. What's wrong with the word pay? Or invest. Yeah. Now this is alternative choice. This doesn't say, are you going to pay premiums? You assume they're going to pay them. The only question is how. How about some other alternates of choice? Come on. Cash or credit card. Excellent. Do you prefer the deluxe or standard? How about some other? Now give them the color. Only 2. Which do you prefer, the white or the gray? Stick shift or automatic?
Standard or Ethel?
Pardon?
Standard or Ethel?
Standard or Ethel? Excellent alternative choice. Always start them out, however, with this phrase, which do you prefer? Puppy dog. You know how you sell a puppy dog? It's very simple. Let someone have it overnight. Is that right? This is the way you sell a puppy dog. Now, many products are sold this way. I met a few months back a fantastic guy who sold more color television sets in 1959 than any color television dealer in the United States of America. He was in a small suburban town in the prairie Midwest, operating in a little garage-sized store. And yet he sold more color television sets than anyone else in the nation out of that little store. You know how he did it? He did a lot of good advertising that was designed to generate people walking into his place of business. Not price advertising, by the way. When they came in, they always stopped to look at a color television set. And he walked up to them and he said, I imagine you've been wondering whether your family could live with one of those things or not, haven't you? You know, there's a lot of families that just can't get along with color television sets. Tell you what I'll do. I wouldn't let you have one of these unless you knew that your family could live with it. So I'll send one out. It won't cost you a dime. I'll just send it out and let you take a look at it. What is your address? And he'd send out the color television set. This character revoked everything I teach because he never closed. He put the set in. 3 days later, he called them on the phone. And he said, "Can I come out and readjust the set, or is it operating all right?" They were expecting a close and didn't get one. And then he paid no attention to them, and he said, 2 weeks maximum. A guy'd come walking into the store, and he'd say, "How do I go about buying that darn thing?" Why? All the kids in the neighborhood had been in, hadn't they? They'd had all their friends in, hadn't they? Could they now say they sent it back? This is puppy dog selling. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite closes. It's a thing called the Ben Franklin balance sheet. Now let me tell you that this is one of those closes that, while it's a primary close, a simple one, you're going to have the words and have them right. These words are critical. Oh, this I love. This close is a dandy. Here's the way it works. You use this on the prospect who is just indecisive. You can't really gel him. You can get no specific reason out of him. He won't gel down. And you want to gel him hard. You start with what we call a story close, and it goes this way. As you know, sir, we Americans have long considered Benjamin Franklin one of our wisest men. Whenever old Ben found himself in a situation such as you're in today, he felt pretty much as you do about it. If it was the right thing to do, he wanted to be sure and do it. If it was the wrong thing, he wanted to be sure and avoid it. Isn't that about the way you feel? Here's what old Ben used to do. He would take a sheet of plain white paper. Now you take a sheet of plain white paper. And he would draw a line down the middle. And you draw a line down the middle. And on this side he wrote yes, pointing to the left-hand column. And on this side he wrote no, putting that at the top of the right-hand column. And then here, pointing to yes, he would list all of the reasons favoring his decision. And here, pointing to no, the reasons against it. When he was through, he simply counted the columns, and his decision was made for it. Why don't we try it and see what happens? Now you swing the paper around, put it in front of him, hand him your pen and say, let's see how many reasons we can think of favoring your decision today. And now you give him all the help in the world. How about this? How about that? Don't you think this ought to go in? Don't you think that ought to go in? If you're half a salesman, you can plug this to 20 or more. I can always wind up on the back of the page. And then when you get to the no area, you just say, well, now let's see how many reasons you can think of against it, and you shut up. Now let me tell you something. I have yet to achieve more than 4 on the no side. Why? Did you ever in your life have a prospect write down in his own handwriting all of the reasons why he should buy your product today? Has this ever happened to you? That's what happens here. He's writing it down. And you realize what's happened to his mind? You start him on the yeses, and he can't switch fast enough to know. to think of more than 4. And then all you do out loud is to start counting the yeses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20, 21, 22, 23. Well, that's 24 on this side. Let's see what we've got over here. 1, 2, 3. Well, the answer is pretty obvious, isn't it, sir? By the way, what was your correct mailing address? This is a dandy. But you need the Ben Franklin validation to make it work. And just as an aside, you will find this in Poor Richard's Almanac. I'm not kidding. Summary questions. This is an inversion of the Ben Franklin balance sheet. This, however, is oral. Again, to be used on the procrastinating client who can't quite give you a reason for not going along but just isn't going. Now, this is what we call a negative yes close. By this I mean, in this close, we allow him to say no. But every time he says no, he means yes. Now, you always start it this way. Just to clarify my thinking, sir. You're the idiot. He never is. Just to clarify my thinking, sir. What is it that isn't quite clear to you? Is it the integrity of, and here you name your company? No, he says. Is it my personal integrity? No. You see, his no means yes, doesn't it? And now you start summarizing all of the facets of your presentation, one question at a time, by asking him, is it this? Is it that? And the last thing you get to is money, by the way. That's way down here. Is it this? Is it that? 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 Well, now each time you is it, and he says no, you've got a yes, haven't you? Now this is the summary questions. Similar situation. This is the old darling of the insurance industry, unfortunately too long gone from the industry. Every great big-time insurance pro that I know of uses it. And the strange thing is that the only industry I know of that uses it is the insurance industry, and they're losing it. This is ridiculous. This is the back the hearse up to the door and let them smell the flowers clothes. This is the make them cry clothes. And this applies to almost any product I know of. Make them cry or make them wish that. How many times in your lives have you had an insurance salesman start closing you this way? You know, it was just a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting in a home just down the block here, a little ways, very much like yours, young couple, just like you sitting in there with me. And I was trying to make a presentation to this young couple to try and point out to them how critical insurance was to their very lives. And they had a little daughter, I'd say she was about, maybe 3.5, 4 years old, a little blonde kid, real cute, but kind of, obstreperous. First thing she did was climb in her father's lap, and he shoved her off, and then she climbed into their mother's lap, and he shoved her off, and next thing I know, she was climbing into my lap, and here I was trying to sell insurance to her parents, and I couldn't shove her off, but her mother finally came to my rescue, and she picked this little girl up and spanked her a little behind. She went crying out of the room. Well, I didn't sell these people that night. And just yesterday morning, I picked up the paper, and I cried. Because that mother and father had just been killed in an automobile accident. And I'm haunted by it, not because of the mother and father, but all I can think of is that child. That child who was so desperate for affection that she crawled into the lap of a stranger. You see what I'm doing? Now, this is similar situation closing. How do you say no without admitting that you hate your daughter? Now, just as effective is the similar situation in which you define someone else's happiness or success because they did own your product. Now, there's no reason why any person in this room cannot tell a story about someone who decided to have the product and achieved a happy result that was rather unexpected. You see, what you do is to put them in somebody else's place so that they imagine that it's them. Why should this be limited to insurance? We've sold aircraft this way. We've sold homes this way. Now we're going to try and sell electronic brains this way by telling them stories about somebody who made the right decision, and hot dog, I look good because he made that decision. I can make it and I can look good too. This is similar situation, storytelling. And we've lost storytelling in selling. But people love stories.